Chapter 1. Albatross, Inscribed Skies. George and Pap slumbered on the terrace floor, while Merritt turned her mind into a canvas for existential musings on this particular Thursday afternoon. The sight of the drapes, with their flowing patterns, lulled her. They danced with a delicate sway, as if guided by the gentle caress of the breeze that whispered from the rice paddies, located just beyond a row of smaller houses below. It was a time when neighbors sought relief in sleep. However, her thoughts deviated from the usual as she roamed through them, unperturbed, until a knock on the door abruptly roused her compatriots. The rotund terrier eagerly wagged his tail and trotted towards the sound, followed by the massive mastiff, with Merritt in tow. Peering through the glass, they spotted the feline's head emerge from behind the vibrant anthuriums. If it were capable of creating the knocking noise, it would have agitated them by incessantly pounding the glass with its paws, challenging the portly brats who stationed themselves at the entrance of the top floor, poised to attack at any moment. Nonetheless, this time, the sound was indeed from someone. Ah, it's William. How could he not make himself known right away? She thought. Is there something I can help you with? She asked, her voice tinged with urgency, as if she wanted to quickly ascertain the purpose of the person's visit in order to find a reason to dismiss him if it wasn't important. And so begins Albatross, Inscribed Skies by Dr. Rhodora Magan, who's with me today. Dr. Magan, it's an honor to host you on our show, Bilateral View. And, what other wonderful topic we could have found but Albatross. So this book was published in 2023 in the summer of last year in United Kingdom. And it's been a wonderful pleasure for me to read your book. I'm still reading it, actually, as we speak. And what a wonderful beginning to this novelette, as you call it. I'm inspired by the kind of, almost synesthetic slowness that the prose brings to the mind of the reader. And it's deeply meditative, which is a complete treat, in the 21st century. So I think our viewers are deeply excited to know what inspired you to write this novel. But before that, what kind of literary or creative practice do you generally observe when you get down to writing? Is this something that you were blessed with since childhood, or is this a kind of an acquired taste? Because the prose here has a very deeply 19th century, almost a Victorian quality to it, but at the same time, it strikes one as very modern. If you don't mind my giving a spoiler, this is set in Nadao city or the Danao city in Philippines, which itself can be quite a sleepy town. So is this the environment of the place or some other literary inspiration that is giving this magical quality to your prose?
Good evening to all our viewers out there. Professor Chatterjee, you gave me a hard time, but I think I'll have to engage with those questions right away, very specifically pointing to the idea of sleepy. When it comes to how, the how thing is really the most problematic here. Because for every writer out there, you need to have inspiration. And as you began by saying, there's synesthesia. At the very beginning of it, it seems to you that there's this ambivalence of a sense of sight, sense of taste, sense of hearing. All the senses out there are so combined perfectly. You reminded me of how it happened a few years back. I intend to mean those years in the author's life, which factored in the creation of this beautiful novelette, as I said. So I decided to make it very, very clear at the beginning. Like there is an introduction of what this place is. You feel that you're yawning along the way, and you feel the breeze coming through the window. These inspirations getting into my head, for example, are reflective of how I understand the value of meditation, because I imagine that when these readers are engaged with me, I have to make them feel relaxed. They have to feel that there's the essence of life at the end of the day. Don't forget, this was during COVID-19, and everyone never wanted to go out because there were protocols, there were IDs to be worn, especially here in the neighborhood. You can't go if there's no ID. And exactly, there is complete decapitation of what you were supposed to do. During this time, people were led to simply sit on the couch or rest or grab some books and read or drink a cup of hot chocolate. So the idea is to give these feelings to these readers and make sure that they also feel the beauty of reminiscing the past, telling themselves that there's beauty in the recollection of these memories, especially when you are so caught up with your life, a very busy corporate life. You really have to sit down and unwind and ensure that that kind of avenue is very, very intellectual. As for some influences, I would think that these are so many in my head. But most importantly, I favor the stream of consciousness. You see, it makes me feel one with what I'm thinking. I'm not dislodged from that memory. There's no disjunctive idea at all. It's so simple, it's easy breezy. You just think of one object, and then from there, everything flows like a river. See, I try to create a very clear atmosphere here of what writing is about. It's not a very monotonous job. It is simply telling people what your heart feels and giving them the picture of how that kind of heart beats.
Thank you, Dr. Magan. That's a very inspiring answer indeed. Now, to take you slightly into the novel without trying to ask for too many spoilers, we are introduced to the three most important and the three most adorable, should I say, characters from this novel. Now, I'm not going to ask you if these are autobiographical characters, but in the very first page, we are introduced to George, Pap, and Mirette. So I will not ask you who Mirette is right away, but unless you want to disclose. But George and Pap don't seem to be human characters. In fact, I think they seem to be canine characters. They look like dogs. One is a terrier, the other is a mastiff, if I'm reading right. So, would you like to tell our viewers what's the importance of non-humans in your creative journey and indeed in this novel?
Okay, to be very honest, I would say I wasn't giving myself the picture of how dogs could create this beautiful atmosphere in the house before. So it's right, George and Pap are not humans. They are the cutest dogs ever in the world, and I would say the most spoiled dogs ever. Because you see, there are no kids in the house, and they sort of replace their positions, the humans' positions, so that they are well loved, well taken care of. And it seems to us that these are the animals who can freely talk to us in a way that when they look at you, you feel that they feel you as well. And when you are not happy or when you're sad, they can instantly feel that from the get go. And more than that, they understand what you're trying to say to them. If you curtail their diet, or if you don't want them to go out because it's raining or the roads are wet, you seem to reprimand them and they listen to you. They create a sense of atmosphere that capitalizes on synergy, the synergy of the human and non human actants. It's natural to fill the atmosphere with green and blue and red and yellow, an element that is breathing, an element that is not breathing, an element that looks at you but cannot verbalize his thoughts because simply they're just dogs. They bark, but you don't necessarily understand the bark or the language there. But beyond the bark, there is a metaphysical understanding of what this is about. Very obviously, this is about love. This is about compassion to these non-human elements, making sure that we understand how they create an ecosystem that is not devoid of what? Happiness.
How wonderful. Which brings me to the point of the very title of the novel or the novelette. Now, you see, the readers won't know this, but I do, that the first scene begins almost exactly like the last scene ends, except for the fact that Pap and George, the two non-humans and the two, most some of the most beloved characters in this novel, they are, I think, in the terrace, and they are looking up exactly at the time that Merritt's flight is taking off, and Merritt is going somewhere out of Nadao
The
city
country.
after several months. Yes, she's traveling abroad actually, and Pap and George will be waiting for her. And that's the first time, I think, in the entire novel that the word Albatross appears, except the title. So, would you like to explain the significance of the title Albatross? Because there are this word is quite polysemic, and in several cultures, albatrosses are not considered good omens. But there are several cultures where albatrosses are indeed considered very lucky. But more importantly, I think on the question, on the issues of family and sleepy town lives and so on, I think albatrosses are also significant because they mate only with one partner throughout their lives. So they are extremely family oriented. I mean, surely they can have multiple partners, but traditionally they are known to have very loyal relationships, and the quote unquote divorce rate among albatrosses, metaphorically speaking, is extremely low. And there are many other cultural mm, associations. There's a great bit of semiotics attached to albatrosses. So, what is that seabird doing in your novel? If you can please explain to our audiences.
The mention of albatross is not so repetitive in the novel. I don't intend to abuse the semiotics there. I just simply want people to know that at the very beginning, there's this bird, and that as they continue journeying with Merit, they would also feel this beautiful trajectory of the bird. From being very sleepy on the terrace, there's the rising action, many things in the lives of Merit and her family unfolded. And as these events unfolded, there were realizations as well. You see, even when there were moments when she was silent, she was all alone, she was even taking this understanding of who she is and what she could be. This type of bird she is envisioning is the kind of bird that is so willing to do a very hard task, very challenging at that, and more importantly, the kind of symbology that is resonating with courage, the lack of fear, and the ability to withstand very difficult climates out there. And for the author to create this sense of identity for Merit, which resonates with the bird itself, albatross, it is very necessary to create a space for this mention of albatross toward the end, not at the middle, not anywhere else, because for her, this mention toward the end is going to give them an impression that not even Pap nor George would be very willing to know about because necessarily they're simply pets in the house. But there are these non-human elements who are heavily affected by the absence of merit. That is the reason why they are waiting for her on the terrace, and that when the albatross was mentioned as a way of giving them a picture that merit leaving them appeared like an albatross. That is so poignant. And I thought that creating that scene elevates the emotional appeal more than the emotional appeal, the psychological drive for many readers to keep on asking, should there be a sequel to this? Could Merritt be coming back indeed? So that was the kind of decision-making process that the author, that I took when I wrote the novelette. I gave the audience the burden. And this is the kind of responsibility that is very necessary so that they could feel the imminent destruction of feeling, that is the feeling of loneliness, or the feeling of immense happiness. At the end of the day, when you see the albatross across the skies, there's that emotion of longing. And I think it's powerful when you give that kind of emotion to your audience, because they'll be able to go back and retrace their steps and discover how it ended that way, or how it could possibly be sustained with two characters toward the end of the novel who are non-humans. So in a way, it's a bit complicated, but that's how life should be. I'm not saying that life should be complicated, but I'm just saying that life being complicated is not complicated. And when life being non-complicated is complicated.
That's a interesting conundrum. So, Dr. Magan, when I was reading this novel, I think I've already disclosed a bit of my mind to you that I couldn't help but notice some peculiar pastoral elements from 19th century England, or indeed the representation of that in Victorian or early 19th century novels, especially by Jane Austen and the Bronte sisters, maybe. So I think pastoralism plays a very important role, not just the countryside, but pastoralism as a profession as well. Seems to play a very key role in your novel. Are there any key literary inspirations that you can walk us through, and any kind of representations of one's immediate life and surroundings in Danau or Nadao city that you were trying to represent in this novel?
Thank you, Professor Chatterjee. I always believe that when I have to write something, it should be something with an impact. So I don't want to write anything that doesn't concern about spirituality, because I think that is the ultimate thing for me, to be able to create this clear idea, or the clarity of who we are and why we're here. That's always the mantra when I write. As for how it feels in the novel or in the novelette, I always intended it to be bucolic. You see, when people have this image in the novel as very, very refreshing and, like I said, bucolic, it sets their mood and would give essentially the feeling that they are drawn more to the conversation happening within the novelette's framework. Merritt's association with a brother who is a pastor is, of course, very obvious, and the relationship they have is very much cultivated on a daily basis. So, like I said earlier, the essence of writing for spirituality and for telling them of what this existence is about at the end of the day will always have to go back to what kind of a job is Jeffrey doing in the novel. That he is very concerned with telling people what this life needs, and that the idea of redemption is ultimately what I am trying to capitalize in the novel as what Christ is always trying to convey on a daily basis before the second coming.
Okay, so on the question of redemption, I think a lot could be said and asked. But you did mention in the beginning of our conversation today that I think COVID-19 had a very important role to play in the way this novel was conceived and the way it shaped. What we found during and a little after COVID-19 was a spate of people. I shouldn't call it a spate, rather it's more of a happy instance. But a lot of people were beginning to turn spiritual. I mean, they did not necessarily always know, or there was no necessary consistency in this global, widespread, dissemination of spiritual values. But people wanted to acquire some new spiritual grace, as it were, and they were trying to turn a new leaf because there was this whole new mythology about how in every culture there was some kind of an idiom or the variant of it about how we have not really focused on the core values of humanity and a planetary existence, and we have become more and more materialistic. So I think
Yeah.
since you have brought up those issues of redemption and COVID-19, I want to ask you a very secular question. I mean, you can take
Okay.
it in a spiritual sense. There is, I think, no harm if you want to if you want to address that in a spiritual theme. But what I'm really driving at is, was there any way in which COVID-19 made you as an author more and more serious about writing as a therapeutic activity or writing as as a tool of redemption? Now, you might find the phrase tool of redemption quite prosaic, a little too mundane. But what I simply mean is, I mean, look around the people that we have all around us. We are educators at the end of the day, and whether or not we like it, we can't always necessarily spread spiritual values because there's some kind of a weight attached to that phrase. But we can always approach activities like writing through more social or secular lenses. So, did it in any way appeal to you as an author to take up writing more seriously as a democratic activity, as a social activity, so that you could inspire others into them taking it up as a not necessarily a professional tool, but something to do with your inner cleansing, to become freer and more holistic individuals?
I always believe that writing should be didactic. And if we talk about redemption, I'd like to highlight that there are many ways by which we could understand the word redemption. So, very clearly, when the novel was created, it was rooted in the idea that the redemptive state, the redemptive state of a man is very essential here. And I'm not just merely talking about redeeming myself from the busy life. Hence, the COVID-19 reset is a necessity for me to be used as a foundation in writing the novel. No, that was not it. Because I thought that even before COVID-19, or even if there's no COVID-19, I think that the act of writing for this purpose, for the purpose of telling people what should be known and what is necessarily forgotten in our very busy life, should be capitalized and should never be left out, whatever happens. So when COVID-19 happened, I thought it was a beautiful avenue for me to sit down and use this beautiful climate. When I say beautiful climate, the climate when again you're not meant to go to school, you're just going to stay in the house because you have to. I thought that the kind of framework is going to really facilitate the kind of thinking process that a writer needs to be able to put across that very strong and powerful message that at the end of the day, we die and see whatever COVID-19 brings to humanity. That is a good framework, or that is a good springboard for us to realize that indeed, anytime anyone's life could be taken away from him. And what's most important thing here is one is aware of where his soul is headed. And again, the Bible is so clear about that the belief in Jesus Christ is so necessary, that this journey going back to God is only materialized if there's that belief in what Jesus Christ did on the cross. So the idea of having this act of writing as some sort of redeeming myself from whatever needs to be looked into as a way of treating it as cleansing, I don't think of it as primary. My goal as a writer and my goal as a human being, while being purged by the COVID-19 pressure, are simply united. And there's just one unilateral way to address that kind of dilemma that everyone is facing right now. That idea of knowing where the soul is headed at the end of the day. So this is very clear for all of those who would want to read the novelette Albatross. That the goal is simple. The goal is to inform. It is not even to tell them what writing is about. That writing is a style or whatever, because whatever writing is done whatever is the produce of writing, the act itself, will always have to do with what the author understands about what she is and who is her savior at the end of the day.
Yeah, that's I think very interesting. Of course, we could go into lengthy theological and cultural debates, but where it connects with our previous conversation, if you notice, is that we were discussing, or we are, I think, still in the process of finding answers to questions that Yuval Noah Harari is raising in a completely different context, seemingly different
Uh-huh.
context. But
Mhm.
I think there's a connection there because a lot of the fear regarding artificial intelligence has also, come pretty much after the global reset of
Mhm.
COVID-19,
Mhm.
because we have got hooked onto technology even more after COVID, and all the spiritual values that we wanted to revive and resurrect. Uh, Again, I don't know if we have to revisit them more rigorously. So my question to you, my last question to you, Dr. Magan, would be: can we consciously try to derive? And I know you're the author, so the burden of self exploration, unfortunately, would be a little more on you this time. But can we consciously try to derive some social, some democratic values from your novel? I know these may not have been the core motivations for you writing this novel, but at the end of the day, does this address any of the problems or perils of excessive materialism? And does it have a message? I know it does, but it would be lovely to hear from you. What kind of moral and didactic messages can young professionals and young scholars draw from your novel?
That's wonderful. I think very importantly, we have to understand that this life we're having right now is not the ultimate life. Everything is so transient. And, as we speak, I don't even know as to how long I would be here on Earth. And if you look around you, if you look at the news flash, there are a lot of newsmakers out there, a lot of accomplishments upheld. And so it appears that everybody now is gearing toward that beautiful trophy and that beautiful name and honor and glory. But I say this, and especially to my students who I encounter each time, that that is not what life is about. And I thought that the albatross, it encapsulates that idea because once you're up in there, you don't really care about what's down there because once you're up there, all you see is that beautiful idea of the clouds. Very soft, very comforting. And then whatever problems you have down there, they're all nothing. So I think it's important to convey the idea that with this reset that COVID-19 is giving, it is also creating a clear pathway for every young professionals out there to not really go for the gold or sort of become aggressive for something very very temporal. At the end of the day, this temporality is not going to match with what awaits in heaven, which is, again, biblically speaking. Because if you notice, Albatross is heavily rooted in biblical principles. So that's very massive. The way I see it, that immense idea that this life will pass and even this world will be burned down, as the Bible says again, that would give you a picture of life as very important. Don't get me wrong with that. But at the same time, in its transience, there has to be a clear concept of who we latch our life onto. Or just to make it very simple, it's very necessary for us to have a foundation. And that foundation is Jesus Christ. That is very clear from the get go of Albatross and toward the end of Albatross. That's why, Professor Chatterjee, I'm so happy that I've written that by God's grace because I thought that the purpose is made clear. And whatever happens, anyone who reads it will be able to realize that this life we're having right now is not actually the life, but it is the life after this life.
Well, again, interesting. It's a complex root of many interesting conversations that we can have. I was just reminded by your focus on transience and what I call ephemerality about a chapter, the last paragraph, one of the last paragraphs in my last book, Adam's Bridge, where I tried to give a representation of how Thailand has commemorated the Ramayana tradition since about the late 18th century. And in Thailand, which is a Buddhist state, the Ramayana is a ritual practice, and they perform it in many of their ceremonies. And one of the key motivations behind the annual performances of the Ramayana is to celebrate ephemerality and to keep reminding people of the impermanence of life and to connect human life with non-human and the biotic and the abiotic, because we tend to have this very anthropocentric and anthropomorphic understanding of sacredness, of spirituality. But I think life, like you have rightly said, exceeds those mortal and those human limitations. Dr. Magan, it's been such a pleasure discussing your wonderful, wonderful book, Albatross, which I highly recommend to not only our listeners, but I think for literary practitioners in general who have lots to learn from you, lots to talk to you about, lots to debate with you, and at the end of the day, to become one in spirit with you. So it's been a wonderful journey for me personally, and I wish we get to see the sequel very, very soon, Dr. Magan.
You're kind of putting pressure on me. But yeah, why not?
So, on that very happy, optimistic, and albatrossy note, it's time for us to bid goodbye to our audience once again, but with the promise that we are going to return very, very shortly with another very interesting conversation. And until then, this is me, Arup K. Chatterjee, signing off. Over to you, Dr. Magan.
Yes, this is me again, Rhodora. But Professor Chatterjee, we have to again thank our audience a million times over for a beautiful reception of episode 2. And we are hoping that they're going to love episode 3. So there are many ways to say thank you to you, but really the real thank you coming from here cannot be verbalized anymore. It's so, so special. And right at this moment, we need to be very ineffable of this kind of immense feeling that is within our hearts. So thank you very much, our dear audience. I'm a Cebuana, so maayong gabi natong tanan.
This is a namaste, a very, very warm one. I wish you all a very, very warm week ahead.
Thank you very much.